Chapter 6. Shari'a, the Law of Islam, the Mullahs Unveiled. Was it ever stated that the purpose of the revolution was a religious one, and one that would empower the Ayatollah Khomeini with authority to apply Sharia law in Iran? Never. The intention was supposedly a socio-political revolution that would ensure the equal and just distribution of wealth among Iranians by the vote of the people. Why would a righteous Islamic leader change his mind and betray his nation? He did it, obviously, to gratify his lust for power, even at the cost of his fellow Muslims and countrymen, aligning himself with the political philosophy of Islam. Khomeini's manipulations were so subtle and clever that it never occurred to the people that he was deceiving them, and the enforcement of Sharia established his absolute supremacy over every individual and power in Iran. Even the elected president could not exercise his own power without the supreme leader's approval. The default on Khomeini's promises was the beginning of unlimited persecution and bloodshed in Iran. His companion mullahs in power killed even their own children, relatives, and friends who criticized them. The Ayatollah Shari'a, who had millions of followers and had rescued the Ayatollah Khomeini from the death penalty in 1963 under the rule of the Shah, was imprisoned by the Ayatollah Khomeini himself. Under his supremacy, his own grandson was taken into prison, and his own son died mysteriously. Great scholars and revolutionaries were humiliated, tortured, and murdered. Before the revolution, we encouraged people to join the revolutionaries for a better Iran. We promised them that our situation would be far better than it had been under the Shah, but now we were embarrassed because of the Ayatollah Khomeini's betrayal, since we had encouraged people to follow him for a democratic Iran. The freedom and opportunities under the Shah were not ideal, but they were far more humane to what the Ayatollah Khomeini was offering to people. Also, we as committed Muslims had wanted to unite our nation for the destruction of Israel and her ally America, but we never wished to humiliate our own fellow citizens and create disunity. It had been encouraging to us that under the leadership of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the revolutionaries were able to establish Hezbollah, the Army of Allah, in Iran and then in Lebanon as an extension and satellite of Iranian military intelligence to support the neighboring anti-Jews. Now, we worried that the internal disunity would hold us back in both our national and international goals. We never knew that the mullahs would start with pro-democratic attitudes but demand absolute allegiance in the name of Islam later. We just did not see it coming. We did not know that they would hate Iranian culture and would enforce ancient Saudi Arabian culture to dominate the lives of Iranians. We were proudly calling ourselves Muslims, yet did not know that any disobedience to the mullahs would cost us our lives and our country. It never even entered our minds that the mullahs would slaughter even their own children for the sake of removing opposition. The mullahs knew that in the long run, they would not be able to lead Iranians for their cause because Iranians were rational people who loved democracy. Therefore, they did whatever it took to gain control over the country's weapons, wealth, business, and every other thing to permanently silence any opposition. Their irrational thoughts and disorderly actions created economic chaos, and the gap between rich and poor became wider and wider. They ignored the desperate need of the nation, but invested billions of dollars for the sake of terrorism via Syria in order to strengthen anti-Israeli militias in Lebanon and Palestine. The poor were quickly forgotten. The mullahs who had once spoken harshly against a luxurious lifestyle now admired it. Though poverty prevailed everywhere in the country, the mullahs became rich and lascivious. They were blaming the people for their poverty, saying that a person would not be poor if he or she obeyed the Ayatollah Khomeini wholeheartedly. I remember the day the Ayatollah Shayesteh, a close companion of the Ayatollah Khomeini, visited a northern city in Iran and passed through our city. The local mullah in power asked him to make a short stop in our city so the Ayatollah Khomeini's zealous followers could send their greeting to him via his close friend. He stopped in the biggest mosque in town. Both the men's and women's sections of the mosque were packed full. Among many other questions, one particular question was directed to him by a young mother. She was crying and said to him that her family did not have enough food, and therefore she was weak and unable to produce milk for her newborn baby. She also did not have money to buy powdered milk to feed her baby. To the astonishment of all, he raised his voice loudly and repeated the saying, "We have the Ayatollah Khomeini as our leader in this country. That means we are rich." This was the response to a young mother who was worrying about her child and pouring out her tears for the hunger threatening the life of her new baby. The mullahs' contempt for people was obvious in every aspect of life. Some of them raped younger girls and boys who were sent to them to learn the Quran. A day did not go by that a mullah did not rape a child. Girls who tried to refuse them were accused baselessly, imprisoned, tortured, and even killed. If a girl opposed the mullah's rule and received the death sentence, and she was a virgin, the mullahs raped her before killing her. This was so that she would fall into the category of an infidel sex slave or a concubine, so under Islamic law her murder would not be a sin. Men who opposed the mullahs were imprisoned and humiliated by every kind of unethical word, tortured and killed. The mullahs had a license to utter any unethical and immoral word and do whatever they liked with the prisoners. No one was able to criticize them anymore. Criticism of them was interpreted as criticism of Muhammad and Allah, and the penalty was death. One mullah, the Ayatollah Hassani, who was also a judge, killed his own 2 sons because they opposed the Ayatollah Khomeini. I decided to leave Tehran and go to my hometown where there was no political or religious tension yet. I thought that away from Tehran I could perhaps do something for my nation and stay faithful to our promises to the people. I could serve and encourage them so together we could raise our country to democracy and to a better future. I needed to focus more on serving people than involving myself in a struggle for power. I also wanted to prove that as a member of the revolution, I could be true to my promises. I was also ready to speak out against the tensions and discrimination imposed by the mullahs in Tehran if I was asked. I began my ministry by teaching younger people that the communist belief of our northern neighbor, Russia, was baseless compared to religious philosophy that believed in God and the creation. I believe this would encourage them to stand against the spread of communism and Russian influence in Iran and attach themselves strongly to Islam. This also gave me an opportunity to unite the younger people to help them prepare themselves for rebuilding our country with Islamic values, spreading Islam internationally, and for aiding the Palestinians and the Shiite militias against Israel in the future. I worked hard to attract younger people to engage themselves in my teachings and to attend camps where fighting, terrorist, and suicide bombing techniques were taught. Finding my soulmate. It was during these activities that I met my wife. She loved to be a channel for the spread of fundamentalism at home and abroad. Her major interest in Islam began when she was 18 years old, just before the 1979 revolution, when the Ayatollah Khomeini entered Iran after years of exile. Due to her father's disinterest in Islam, her family was not practicing Islam even by nominal standards. He was an atheist who ran away from the Russian state of Azerbaijan to Iran in the time of Stalin, who killed non-communist as well as communist opponents. He could never manifest his atheist belief in Iran openly, since the Shah of Iran was pro-West and anti-communist. However, towards the last month of the Shah's reign, when he was losing his power to the revolutionaries, my wife's father took part in the street protests. This was partly because the revolution was more socially and politically motivated, and Iranian communists could identify with it. My wife also went to the protests with her father, gradually showing interest in the revolution and deciding to become a follower of the Ayatollah Khomeini. She was influenced by the comparative courses and consequently decided to support the revolution as an Islamic religious person. I met my wife for the first time in one of my comparative courses. Her regular attendance and our common interest led to my interest in her, and we soon married. We did not know each other personally. It was illegal for a boy and girl to get together, talk about their personalities or families, and plan for life to see whether there was enough common ground for unity in marriage. Dating is totally forbidden. It was also illegal for me to express my desire directly to her or receive her consent. However, contrary to common practice, I secretly gave a letter to her asking her to be my wife. She shared this with her parents, and they allowed her to respond positively. The main reason she married was to uphold the traditions of Islam, which forbids young women from remaining single. She was also determined to attach herself to a radical Muslim man so that she could fight for Islam side by side with him and release herself from the limitations of ancient Islamic marriage, which requires women to stay at home. If they wanted to go out, they had to cover themselves in a way so that nobody could distinguish who they were. Since this was against the Iranian culture for women, she wanted to remain an Iranian Muslim too, encouraging many other younger girls to stay closer to Islam. Against Iranian custom, our marriage was performed in a mosque. The mosque was a symbol to our followers of the importance of Islam. If we wanted Iranians to be radical Muslims, our whole lives had to be centered on Islam, and the mosque itself was preeminent in our beliefs. Our marriage motivated many younger girls to attach themselves more closely to Islam. A mosque, in addition to being a place of worship, is also a court, a military garrison, and a parliament for committed Muslims to prepare themselves in every aspect for fighting non-Muslims or any infidelity among Muslims. Committed Muslims are obligated to fight non-Muslims and all who oppose them, even those who are their relatives. A mosque is the best place for them to learn hatred toward their opposition and non-Muslims. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, taught hatred to his followers in his own mosque and then led them to destroy the Jewish city of Medina. The mosque is also vital for establishing Muslims as sovereign over non-Muslims in a non-Islamic society. Building a mosque in a non-Islamic society or country symbolizes Islam's claim over that society or country, even with a non-Muslim majority. The Quran states that all lands belong to Muslims even if they have never occupied them. Once Islam assumes power over the government, non-Muslim citizens will be given a choice to join Islam or be killed. Non-Muslims may also buy their lives yearly in order to be spared a death penalty, but only if they are Jews or Christians. When Islam rules over a country, Muslims become the real citizens and owners of that country, and non-Muslims fall into a second-class citizenship that is unequal to Muslims. By having our marriage ceremony in a mosque, my wife and I wanted to teach our followers to understand the significance of the mosque in the spread of Islam. Our marriage attracted the attention of many people. As revolutionaries, we plan to send some of our followers to non-Islamic countries in the near future with the primary mission of gathering Muslim support and building mosques. We needed to build a foundation for people to learn the role of the mosque. Many Islamic countries have invested millions of dollars in non-Islamic countries to build mosques and Islamic schools, which helps to pave the way for Muslims to own those countries. Building a mosque in a non-Islamic country is a seal of ownership for committed and radical Muslims. Muhammad's initiatives, my motive. I won the trust of many young people in my hometown and helped them prepare for 2 wars or jihads. The first jihad was against poverty, and the second against Israel in the West, especially America. Muhammad also had 2 jihadi initiatives. These 2 jihadi steps were his main approaches to the Islamization of the societies around him. He promised his followers a prosperous life and planned to provide for their needs so they would follow him. With mostly poor followers, Muhammad was unable to establish a strong army for Islam. He decided to use wives, concubines, and slaves as the center of his plans for the spread of Islam. He needed great wealth for his plans, which was more important to him than anything else. So he legalized the looting of non-Muslims since there was no other income source for him. He and his small community began looting the caravans of pagan Meccans and thus obtained great wealth. His community prospered, and he was able to hire more followers as a result. His number of soldiers grew, and he was able to establish a strong army. Without this army, he could not have invaded the Jewish tribes in Medina or the pagans in Mecca, putting an end to their history on the peninsula of Arabia. We also needed to follow his footsteps as followers of Muhammad in Iran and do the same with zealous Iranian Muslims, but with contemporary tools. We didn't need to loot non-Muslims. Our country sat on rich oil fields and had great income from selling oil. We believed we could strengthen our followers with oil money, gaining access to most advanced weapons and dominate other societies. However, the Ayatollah Khomeini and his surrounding mullahs did not have the same politico-religious mind as Muhammad. Khomeini ignored his Iranian followers while supporting Syria, Hezbollah, and Lebanon, and the Palestinians against Israel. He did not see a need to strengthen his Iranian followers first. I knew he would not be able to quicken the destruction of Israel by ignoring his own nation. Instead, he would rather be the cause of hatred and bloodshed in his own country. Iran was not a radical Islamic country when the Ayatollah Khomeini became the supreme leader. The revolution's purpose was not to turn Iranians into radical Muslims. Many Iranians who rejected the rule of the Shah were nominal Muslims. The revolutionaries desired freedom and economic and political justice. Their minds were far from the idea that Islam had to be carried worldwide or that Israel and America had to be destroyed. Only the Ayatollah Khomeini and his very close companions knew that they had to change the direction of the revolution secretly and progressively. Even the real followers of the Ayatollah Khomeini, including myself, who only made up less than 2% of the entire Iranian community, did not know his plan for the future. What we heard clearly was that the Shah had to leave Iran. As long as the Shah remained, people could not have their rights. It was later that we were gradually persuaded that Islam must rule. So we, Khomeini's followers, needed to spend money and find many followers. Without committed followers, we would not be able to reach our goal of destroying America or Israel. Khomeini obtained power but did not have a long-term plan for Islam. Not only did he not have a plan, he did not have the capability to develop one. His initiatives became very random. He invaded the American embassy in Tehran without knowing that Iranians were not ready to fight America yet. Like the Ayatollah Khomeini and his surrounding mullahs, we also hated America and Israel. Hostility to America and Israel was the central pillar of radical Muslim goals. But we wanted to have a strong Muslim nation first, establishing a strong Islamic economy like Saudi Arabia, and then we would start our international mission. That would prepare the ground for us to employ cultural, political, and economic jihadists to penetrate and undermine Western values from inside and destroy them. We believed Israel could not be captured without paralyzing America. And Israel without America would be like a piece of bread for us to swallow. Hometown hero. Like Muhammad, I began the fight against poverty in my Muslim nation to prepare them for the real jihad against non-Muslims. People living in my hometown told me that the work I did in my hometown in 1 year was more than the mullahs accomplished in the 30 years of their rule in the region. I established an organization called Building Jihad to construct roads and schools in rural areas and take electricity to many villages and give residents access to the advantages of bigger cities. My actions proved that I was not like the mullahs in Tehran, who only wanted to fill their own pockets, ignored the poverty of their own people, and rushed into terrorism. My service in the area made me famous, which eventually led to my candidacy for the Islamic Parliament. The first election for the newly established Islamic Parliament was drawing close. By this time, I had many followers and was beginning to lead them like a party separate from what the mullahs had established. The mullahs didn't want any other party or movement, and the Quran rejects a multitude of parties. Only the party of Allah, Hezbollah, must triumph. For this reason, there's always struggle in fundamentalist Islamic countries among parties. Sunnis, the followers of Muhammad's in-laws, and Shiites, the followers of his son-in-law, have slaughtered millions of each other's people since the death of Muhammad because of political differences. Islam is a political and military religion, and as a result, every sect or group of Islam is at least to some extent both political and military. Every group believes that the other groups cannot be real Muslims or of the party of Allah, and that they therefore must be destroyed. Because of this, the Ayatollah Khomeini and his friends decided to destroy other parties. After a while, I discovered that many revolutionaries in other parts of the country had achieved some success with the same political philosophy I had and had acquired many followers. This gave me hope that we could be the majority in Parliament in the near future and would be able to lead the country with a practical Islamic plan toward the future. Alas, I was not aware that the mullahs would do whatever it took in order to push back servant leaders and take their own protégés to the Parliament. To Israel and beyond. The organization of Building Jihad grew rapidly with many activities and areas of expertise. My fame led many people to commit themselves to Islam and to follow my plan. There's a strong political voice of Islam that says Muslims must first establish power and then use their power to spread Islam. A powerful Muslim community must always have the Quran in one hand and a sword in the other for fighting and imposing Islam. This saying is the daily bread of fanatic Muslims everywhere. This was always the concluding message of my speeches in mosques or public places in my hometown. Our goal was to overcome the enemy at home first, any enemy that was an obstacle to the prosperity of people, and then take Islam abroad to establish an Islamic empire, the Caliphate. Our emphatic international goal was to capture Israel, eradicate all Jews, and make Israel a capital state for all Islamic nations, handing over its government to our Shiite brothers, the future members of Hezbollah in Lebanon. To make our people believe in our movement and be part of our international goal, we influence them psychologically, for example, by removing existing road signs and replacing them with signs pointing to Israel. Signs indicating 500 or 1,000 kilometers to Tehran were replaced with the signs showing 2,000 or so kilometers to Israel. We had to first put the belief in the minds and hearts of people that Jews do not have any land rights in the Middle East. All lands belong to Muslims and the Muslim world. Saddam's interference. To achieve our goal for Israel, we first needed to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. Even though we had separated ourselves from the Mullahs, like the Mullahs, we too believed that Saddam had to go. Our message to Iranians was that to invade Israel, we had to first overthrow Saddam's government. Saddam was not only a nominal Muslim dictator, he was also a Sunni who ignored the rights of Shiites in Iraq, torturing and killing them. We believed that the majority Shiites needed to rule over Iraq, which would be our highway to Israel. We began to establish a government for Iraq and Iran, appointing the Ayatollah Hakim, an Iraq Shiite clergy, as the head of that government. Our plan became urgent after Saddam invaded Iran. His invasion was a good excuse for the Ayatollah Khomeini to retaliate. He hated Saddam and aimed to destroy his regime. The Ayatollahs hated the goals of Sunni Saddam and his Ba'ath Party, which was to capture and unify Islamic countries under the umbrella of his party. The invasion of Saudi Arabia was also part of our plan, but it was a second priority. Our major focus was to capture Iraq first. After that, our leaders believed that if Shiites captured Saudi Arabia, especially Mecca, then they would be able to stop the growth of Sunni doctrine progressively and spread the Shia faith everywhere.